avoid finding some nice segue into this and just open up by talking about Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. And with that, as we begin, as always, I'm Joel Serrano.
And I'm Leo Serrano.
And this is Deep Dive Book Club Podcast. And how convenient for us that we now get to talk about Ernest Hemingway and the Old Man and the Sea for our Deep Dive Book Club. Into the Sea we go.
So the novella was written in late 1951 over about a 6-week period. It won a Pulitzer Prize and was the only work of Hemingway's mentioned by name when he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. Can you believe he got a prize just for something he spent 6 weeks writing?
You know, I thought about that when I was reading it, and that's impressive and amazing. And I'm pretty sure anyone that you go to and say, hey, if you just do this work for 6 weeks and you will get a Pulitzer Prize, which comes with a good amount of money as well and accreditation, most people would take that trade. But I think this also highlights one of the times where he had a lifetime of experiences going into this. So although we only see a 6-week working period, he has a lifetime beforehand writing and experiencing things in order to make this art.
Yeah, everything he's done up until this point, because at the time he's in his early 50s when he wrote this.
And if I'm remembering correctly, he wrote this in Cuba?
Yeah, he was in Cuba. He was fishing and drinking every day.
You know what? That sounds like a Hemingway activity to do.
Yeah, he loved doing both of those. Lots of drinking, lots of fishing.
I think that'd be a good euphemism. Pulling a Hemingway this weekend.
I don't want to do that.
So,
all right, I'll let you tell us a little bit about Hemingway himself.
Sure. Hemingway, born in 1899. He was especially famous for his short stories. He was an American novelist and journalist. Started in Illinois, kind of near Chicago. I think some of the things that embodied his work and kind of colored the way that he wrote was he was an ambulance driver on the Italian front during World War I and got injured by shrapnel. So he was pretty close to the front lines. This was in 1918.
And he wrote a book about an ambulance driver on the Italian front that got injured.
Yeah, I mean, he's pulling from his own experiences, and I think we'll see that in Old Man and the Sea.
I mean, that's a good story.
It is a good story. It's also useful to write the things that you have experienced. He settled in Key West, and you can actually go down and see Hemingway's house, and it's full of six-toed cats.
Have you been to Hemingway's house?
Yes, I went to Hemingway's house when I went down to the Key, and it's full of six-toed cats.
Why is it full of six-toed cats?
They have some type of mutation, and I think they've just been fed and have bred there.
Someone's keeping the cats?
I have no idea. I just saw the cats, and then someone told me, yes, there's a whole bunch of six-toed cats around his house. I did not mentally investigate further.
So is this like a museum?
Nope, it's just a thing that happens.
All right. Okay.
It's like, what is it, Brevard, North Carolina? They have a whole bunch of white squirrels. And the story that I was told by a local was that a circus was coming through with a whole bunch of white squirrels. The train fell off the rail, and all the squirrels escaped and made a white squirrel breeding population in the area.
Very interesting.
I don't know if that's true, but there you go. It's like just a nice local creation myth. I don't know why there's cats. This isn't about cats. Moving on.
All right.
In 1937, Hemingway went to Spain, and he covered the Spanish Civil War since he was a journalist. And that formed the basis for a 1940s novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. That was also written in Cuba. And then later, like the book we're talking about today, 1952, that's The Old Man and the Sea that was published. That's what won the Pulitzer Prize. And then a fun fact I also found out about him is he was in Africa for a period of time in his life, which will also come up in the book. And he was in 2 plane crashes that permanently injured him for the rest of his life.
I don't know that I'd get back on a plane after the first crash.
They were consecutive plane crashes.
That makes sense.
And then after that, he ended up committing suicide in his home in Idaho in 1961.
That's something I'd like to read more about. You know, like, did he decide to go out on his own terms? You know, what the story was there.
I don't know.
Yeah, definitely something we could look into. Okay, so let's talk about the story itself. I've read a few Hemingway books and short stories, and this novella is probably my favorite thing that he's written. This will be the second time I've read through it. The book itself is about Santiago, who's an elderly fisherman who has not caught a fish in 84 days and is considered very unlucky. He has a boy who he's kind of trained and helped along, but he can't. The boy can't go out on the boat with him anymore because his parents are like, that guy's too unlucky. You need to go work on other fishing boats. But the boy, whose name is Manolin, but really throughout the novella, he's almost exclusively referred to as the boy, and Santiago is almost exclusively referred to as the old man. The boy, he helps out Santiago however he can. He'll bring him some bait, he'll bring him some food or coffee. And the story is really about him, the old man, going out and having one last really good catch, his one last big catch that he brings back, and the crazy struggle he goes through on bringing that back. He catches this crazy large fish. It's like they'll never believe how large this thing is, and all the work he has to do to get it, and the fish is chasing him out or he's got the fish hooked, and the fish is just pulling him out to sea for over a day. And then once he finally defeats the fish, he has to lash alongside the boat because of how big it is. He has to get it back to Cuba, make his way back home, and he's got to fend off sharks the whole time. He doesn't actually successfully fend off the sharks, but the carcasses of the fish he has is still there and is proof of how big the fish actually was.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think it ends up with the people being amazed that he got this fish, even though nothing was left of it, so he couldn't sell it and it wasn't usable. But in his mind, he deterministically said, I'm getting this back or I'm dying.
Right. Yeah, he was fully committed 100% to it. I mean, he lost a knife, he lost supplies, he went all in on getting this fish.
It felt like just getting the fish back or proving that he got it was more important than even his own survival at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think he even says that at one point. It's, fish, it's either you or me, and I don't really care which one, actually, as long as it's one of us.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's ready to move on. So, with that, what did you think of the novel as a whole?
I really like how short it is. It's definitely not. It works perfectly at the length that is. It's a novella. It's very short. It's very tense, very tight prose. Everything is very, very tight. It works. I mean, any longer, and I think it just wouldn't hold the same like emotions. It wouldn't work as a longer piece, and it wouldn't really work shorter. One thing that I was thinking about with the book is it's similar to Melville's book, Moby Dick, where Moby Dick just goes on and on and on and on. And I heard a really good interpretation from a friend of mine who's like, well, the kind of repetitiveness and boringness of Moby Dick is kind of the point of the book. It gives you the experience of what a sailor goes through. And I thought that was a really good interpretation. I don't know if it's right. With Old Man and the Sea, any shorter, and I think you wouldn't have the emotional takeaway you would, and any longer, it would overstay its welcome. So I think the length is perfect, and it's pretty much continuous. Like it's a continuous scene that plays out the whole time. It takes place across maybe 3 days, 4 days, and the old man is awake for most of that time. It's almost exclusively like him getting this fish, being pulled out by this fish, and his travails of getting back. And you would think, okay, how can just that take up the space of a whole novella? But it does. And a lot of it is Santiago's inner dialogue and sometimes external dialogue with himself and the fish and the world around him. So I love it. Overall, I love it. And well, before we jump into the next thing, what was your overall impression of it?
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I do agree with you. It felt more poetic, where it was the right size for the messages and emotions it was conveying. Any shorter, it would lose the luster of what needed to be there, and any longer, it would not really have the same impact. But I thoroughly enjoyed everything it had to share, and it had wonderful, colorful characters that you could very quickly and easily identify and connect with. The boy and the relationship in between the old man and the boy was, I think, is a great example of, we didn't see the boy and him interact a whole bunch on screen, but there was so much built up very easily in between the sentences that you could connect a whole story in your brain rapidly.
Right. Okay, so now let's talk about the emotions of the book. Interesting experience I had, this being my second time reading the book, is that the first time I read it, which was maybe a decade ago, I had the experience of it being kind of bittersweet, more sad. And very interestingly, this time around, my experience of it was more so almost joyful. Like I got just more optimism, more positivity out of it. And the ending is bittersweet. I mean, he works so hard to get this, and it almost kills him. And all that is left over of this giant fish that he catches is a carcass. But there's still victory in that. He still proves that, hey, I can do this. This is something I can do. And it's just very interesting, having done two readings, the difference in those experiences. And a lot of that has to do with maybe where I was at in the two different times during my life when I read it. But I just thought that was interesting that I could take away two very different emotional impacts from it. What about you?
Sure. I think the emotional impact was quite powerful, and it had so much to convey. I had a mostly positive experience and a happy experience, because when we see the drive of the old man getting the fish in and his determination and him going out on his own, even after 85 days of no luck, he still goes out again to try to catch another. And when he does, he has such a determined mindset. Without avarice or desire for fame, he has this internal struggle. And it made me have the feeling of the same. There's an older professor back at my school. He was 85, but he would still run one of the, not marathons, but one of the races that we had there. And he almost always came in near dead last. But the elation and joy that my professor had when he's 85 and he could still run that 5K was beautiful, because his victory wasn't this external validation. It was this internal deterministic drive to rage against the dying of the light, so to speak, but to put all into what you're doing, whether or not you'll get a beautiful outcome. And I think that's part of the human spirit.
So he came in dead last every time, and it's something he just continued to do?
Yeah. And
for the joy of doing it.
Right. And to show that he could do it.
Right.
To himself.
How old
and to
was
no
he?
one else. Well, at the time, the last time I ran with him, he was 85.
Wow. 85.
And still runs a 5K.
85 and still running.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And so I think that's where the positivity came in for me, was the deterministic human spirit inside of the story. This old man struggling, sure, with the fish, but also with himself and with his aging body. Because there's times, and one of my favorite scenes, probably jumping ahead here, was when he was talking with his left hand, being like, you betrayed me. And he's trying to get it to work just so that he can accomplish getting the fish in.
Yeah, I really like that scene. It's you see him like going through the negotiation with his aging body. Like, come on, you can do it. Stick with it. Keep going. You still got it. And he's having to negotiate with the fact that his body is getting older, and his ambitions and spirit are outpacing his body. His body can't keep up with him anymore.
So that's my overall emotions. And since we're the Deep Dive Book Club podcast, how do you feel about the story? Sure, it's a great story on the surface, but what was your reading of the depth inside of this novella?
So I kind of go back and forth. With Hemingway, kind of what you see is what you get. Like the surface level is kind of the story itself. And I think a lot of that has to do with how much the stories reflect his own life and where he's at in his life during those times. He was an ambulance driver on the Italian front that got injured. He wrote a story about an ambulance driver on the Italian front that got injured. So he's very much, his writing is Hemingway himself on his sleeve. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. On the other hand, there can be deeper meanings and symbols at play in a work unconsciously conveyed, even if the author didn't have it there. You know, there's a lot. I was kind of reading through the different viewpoints on it and what critics have had to say about it, and some people see Christian symbolism in there of the like death and rebirth happening, the fish. There's a lot going on there, and I can kind of see that. I don't know how much that is reading too much into it and how much of that is just kind of evoked from the text itself. So I got kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I see deeper patterns and symbols, and other times it's more surface level. I'll think about it. Right now I'm leaning a little bit more towards the surface level of the story is outshining the deeper parts of it more.
Sure. And when we talk about surface level and depth, I often think of books or art where there's multiple layers that you can keep reading into it that were intentional and sometimes unintentional. But oftentimes, especially with these acclaimed works, people can analyze it so far that it becomes meaningless or disconnected from the original work. And I think it's easy to do that with poetries or novellas. I will say Hemingway did do quite a good job of giving you just enough to be ambiguous. The easiest one is like the lions, for example, where he dreams of two lions on the coast of Africa. He never explicitly tells you what that means, but he brings it up a couple of times, just enough to have that symbolism for people to create their own meaning behind it. And I think that's also another thing, because he was in Africa in the 1930s, and he probably saw a couple of lions, and then he wrote about it in this book. So he's pulling from his own experiences, putting it here, and giving you just enough to latch on whatever meaning you want.
Right, and then same thing. I don't know how intentional the lions are, how intentional any meanings behind that are from Hemingway's point, but he has a genius for conveying that. Okay, what else you got?
I was just going to add, I also think that's true for some movies where people see them having deeper meanings is when the movie ends in an ambiguous fashion.
Right, yeah. I mean, ambiguity is fun. You need ambiguity. You can't have everything spelled out all the time. That's no fun. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we will jump into deeper elements of the story.
All right, and with that, we're back.
Okay, so one of the things I want to jump into is the relationship between the boy and the old man. One of the aspects of their relationship is that it is kind of inverted who's taking care of who. We see that the glimpse we get is that the boy is more and more taking care of the old man, and the old man is kind of having to accept his newfound humility and be taken care of. He's having to let the boy take care of him. One exchange you kind of see them have in the beginning of the book is over the boy saying, "Hey, let me go get you fresh baiting fish so he can have the resources he needs to go out and do the fishing." And the old man's like, No. So let's see here. So the boy offers to get fresh sardines as bait for the old man. He says, "Let me get 4 fresh ones." "1," the old man said. His hope and his confidence had never gone, but now they were freshening as when the breeze rises. "2," the boy said. "2," the old man agreed. "You didn't steal them." "I would," the boy said, "but I bought these." "Thank you," the old man said. He was too simple to wonder when he had attained humility, but he knew he had attained it, and he knew it was not disgraceful, and it carried no loss of true pride. So I think that exchange between them kind of exhibits a lot of things, but the first one is that inverted relationship where it's the boy who's now kind of more and more taking care of Santiago. What do you think about that?
And I think to give a little bit more context to that situation, in the novella itself, it talks about the boy fishing with the older man while he was younger, and the older man clearly teaching him how to fish and how to be on a boat. And you're right, we do see this inverse relationship where the boy is now taking care of the old man in a much more significant way, if not a more direct. This trope of the inversion of support we see play out not only in this story, but in several stories. I think it's a beautiful part of understanding the passage of time and our lives in different stages. That in itself helps reflect and understand our own mentality. This is a long-winded way of saying, I think it's beautiful. It's a common trope we see. And one of the reasons that we see this common trope is that it's a true reflection of our life.
Where the new generation has to take care of the older generation, the outgoing generation.
Correct, where roles are reversed and you take care of your parents or grandparents, whereas they took care of you when you were younger.
And it's not a guarantee. I mean, that's something we get to do. It's not something that not everyone gets to do. Either you don't have a family or you are separated from your family as you get older, or you just don't make it to old age, which happens, all the time.
Right. I mean, it's truly a privilege to be able to take care of someone that took care of you when you were younger. And there's truly no way to give back the gift that someone has given you when you're younger to help grow or develop you as a person. I can think of long-term relationships with family members and also short-term relationships of when I was traveling, of people that gave me something that I would never in my entire life be able to properly repay.
Right. And you see that same dynamic between the boy and Santiago. The boy, he loves him. He loves him. He's devoted to him, even though the rest of the village, says he's got bad luck. Even the boy's family is like, no, you can't go fishing with the old man anymore. He's unlucky. You have to go on other boats. The boy does that, but he helps Santiago, as much as he can. Getting him food, getting him drinks, getting him little supplies here and there, like the sardines. And so you just see him doing whatever he can to honor that relationship.
Absolutely. I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful little relationship, and it was one of my favorite parts of the book. As for the old man himself, he is extraordinarily competent and intelligent in various ways in how he understands fishing and baseball and his connection to his profession, even though he calls himself, and the narrator calls him, a very simple man.
Right. As we just read, he thinks of himself as simple. The narrator calls him simple. And in lots of ways, he does exhibit a kind of simplicity, but that is not to say that doesn't have a bearing on how intelligent and competent he is, because as you can see throughout the story, he is both very intelligent and very competent. He has no problems with being dragged out to sea by a giant fish and knows everything he needs to do. The weather and the sea and the wildlife around him, all of it, he understands at a intimate, innate level.
Yes, and I think that's part of what we're seeing here is that level of intelligence and complexity overrides the more academic idea of what a simple person is, because he talks through how the tide is moving, how the wind is changing, and he goes through all of these complex calculations in order to arrive at the solution that he needs, as well as having the wherewithal and willpower to push through his body that's breaking down and understanding, well, I need to just cut up this raw fish and eat it right now so I have enough protein or calories in my system to keep fighting this fish.
And that's a good point that you bring up about the willpower. He does exhibit, very strong willpower. He sticks to pursuing this fish, even though it has a very strong, just the pursuit itself seems to have a very strong chance of endangering him or killing him. And he's got this supreme willpower that he exerts on the situation, which is so interesting when you consider the fact that he does have humility now in his own old age. He, as we just read, he realizes now at some point he acquired humility because he can accept the sardines from the boy. And that's a very interesting combination, the humility and the willpower. That reminds me of the book Good to Great, where they talk about, this is a complete digression that doesn't have any bearing on the book, but humility and willpower are seemingly the highest levels of leadership that Jim Collins, when doing his research, found was exhibited in companies that had great performance over the comparison companies they did in that study. Willpower combined with humility. Very interesting.
Something we could all strive for. And I think accepting our aging body and accepting our limitations is a difficult and humbling experience in and of itself. Quote, "There was no cast net, and the boy remembered when they had sold it. But they went through this fiction every day. There was no pot of yellow rice and fish, and the boy knew that too." End quote.
Great. So why did they go through this fiction is the relevant conversation here.
What is your opinion?
You know, when I first read it, I was a little confused as to why they were doing this. I think it's not so much what's happening at the verbal level. I think it's just them going through the motions of a familiar routine together, even though they're playing out these fictions. I also wondered if it was the old man exhibiting a kind of senility that was the boy was working with, but I don't think that's the case because the old man doesn't really display any senile behaviors.
I don't know that I saw dementia or senile characteristics in the rest of the novel, and I don't know why they had this particular fiction to begin with. Maybe familiarity, but then again, they could do something else that had a familiarity that wasn't related to lying to each other.
Right, there's no cast net and there's no yellow pot of rice.
So why is it there?
I would love to know that.
I don't know either.
So we learn in another section of the book, we learn that the old man only dreams of places and of the lions he saw on the beaches of Africa when he worked on ships traveling the African coast in his younger days. Quote, "He no longer dreamed of storms, nor of women, nor of great occurrences, nor of great fish, nor fights, nor contests of strength, nor of his wife. He only dreamed of places now and of the lions on the beach. They played like young cats in the dusk, and he loved them as he loved the boy." End quote. So, as we alluded to earlier, why do you think he was dreaming of lions?
My best guess is because Hemingway was dreaming of lions.
You think Hemingway was dreaming of lions?
Yes, because he went to Africa, and he specifically went to two safaris in Africa, in which I'm sure he saw a lion.
Why do you think Hemingway was dreaming of lions?
I don't know. I don't know why Hemingway was dreaming of lions.
I wonder if Hemingway had this experience of being on a ship and watching lions playing on the shore, if he just liked the image.
What a great question. I am not sure, but I can imagine as an author taking a true experience that he has and cultivating it into a more idealistic, picturesque image in his own brain. But he could have also actually have seen it on his travels.
True. This kind of bears with one interpretation that I've read about Santiago and Hemingway, essentially that Santiago was a stand-in for Hemingway. Because remember, he was in his early 50s when he wrote this book. It was his last major work. In the book, as you see, Santiago achieves a Herculean feat despite his age and his streak of bad luck. And the book itself, people have seen as a response to Hemingway growing older and reflecting on that. Because he's in Cuba. Is this after his plane crash injuries?
Yes.
So he's in Cuba. He's got his plane crash injuries. He's fishing every day. He's drinking, and he's like, you know what? I'm gonna write this book about an old man. So that's probably what was weighing on his mind.
Yeah, so I imagine that is the true meaning. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe there's a deeper essence for why the lions were the way that they were, or why he dreamed of them multiple times. But my best guess is that was just Hemingway's experience, because he was older. He was suffering with injuries to his own body and was in pain. And so perhaps he himself was dreaming of his time in Africa, or the safaris where he got to go on wonderful adventure rather than of women or of contests or struggles, as he mentioned.
And I don't know what it says about someone if they're only dreaming of places. So yes, he's dreaming of the lions, but the other thing he dreams of is places. And I don't know what that would say.
I don't
Do
know
you
either.
dream of places?
Sometimes.
I dream of buildings pretty often. Buildings of all kinds of sizes. Mostly normal buildings that are like gargantuan sized for some reason. That happens fairly often, and I don't know what it means. I don't know if that's the same as dreaming of a place.
I don't know. My dreams that involve some locality is typically either a country that I've been to, or even I have dreams of countries I haven't been to, but that is my image of them.
Okay, quick break, and then let's jump into the discussion of the sea. Okay, so we talked about the sea, the gendered nature of language. To dig a little bit more into that, in our in-person book club, we talked about the possible implications of gendered language and how that may affect the way you see the world and interact with the world. What do you think about that idea that the language, I don't remember the exact name of this theory, but the way that language affects the way you perceive the world?
For sure. I think that language definitely affects the way that you see the world. Not just me, but plenty of other linguists and philosophers believe that language is in itself a framework for which our brain can understand and comprehend the outside world. Because to first understand what we're observing, we typically need to name it something. And those names help us derive ideas and concepts and isolate them into little categories, and then we can start to process those. Of course, our intuitive brain, similar to the book that we're reading now in Thinking Fast and Slow, the intuitive brain can interpret plenty of incoming stimuli rather quickly, but I think the secondary part of us doing the analysis of that typically requires some naming scheme to create that framework.
And so do you think gendered language has an effect on the way we perceive the world? So someone whose first language is a gendered language like Spanish, do you think that that has an effect on the way that person sees the world?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The long answer is what I said before your follow-up question.
Well, a naming scheme isn't the same thing as gendered language.
It's a part of the framework.
Okay. How do you think that gendered language affects the way people see the world?
I don't know that one. What a great question.
Kind of in the theme of this book, it makes me think almost of a type of animism, if that makes sense. Santiago sees the world around him, even aspects of his own body, his past, especially the wildlife, but the sea and the weather, everything around him. He addresses as sentient beings and talks to them in a way that as if they were listening. And part of this is his habit of talking to himself that we'll talk about here in a second. But part of it is also just the way he interacts with the world. He calls the dolphins brothers. He says the seagulls, play jokes on each other and are also brothers. He, speaks of the sea in a very familiar way as if he's addressing another sentient being like himself. And, to gender a concept, like to have a language that genders a concept, I wonder if that gives someone if you're gendering something, then what other aspects are you kind of unconsciously giving to a concept or a thing that makes it more human-like? Anthropomorphization, if I remember correctly. If you see a tree as male or female, then are you automatically also giving it some other aspects of human nature or human likeness? Interesting idea, and I don't know if it's answerable. I don't know if there's anything there, but I think there's something related to the kind of animism that Santiago displays and the way he talks about, the sea as feminine and mysterious.
Sure. In the same way that psychologists look at the connection that we have, I believe the halo effect is the naming for it, where you see someone as smart and ambitious, and then you later will go on to think that person could potentially also be kind and generous because they fall into the category of positive, and you're attributing other characteristics that you don't have evidence for based on a positive or negative experience. And in that way, perhaps the engendering of a tree, if you call it feminine might subconsciously take on feminine characteristic, I think is what you're trying to say. Pulling into psychology, I think the term is the halo effect.
Yeah, the halo effect is the tendency to see all aspects of a person, or think of all aspects of a person as good if you think of that person as good, or bad if you think of that person as bad, even the aspects of that person that you're unaware of. So a great example is like a president. If someone dislikes the president, and if they dislike them enough, they dislike everything that president says, everything the president does, everything they've ever done. It's all bad.
They only have bad characteristics.
They only have bad characteristics to that person. That's the halo effect, the negative version of it. And the opposite's also true. Let's say, someone's in a relationship at a young age. It's one of their first relationships, or maybe it's their first relationship, and they fall head over heels for someone. They typically exhibit a type of halo effect. Oh, this person that I'm so in love with can do no wrong. Anything wrong they do, it's washed over. That's the positive version of the halo effect.
Lionizing.
I don't know about that. What does the word lionize mean? Let's look it up.
Lionize? It's basically the opposite of demonizing. Basically making someone a saint or a hero in your mind. All right, speaking of language, as you were talking about, the old man ends up talking to the seagulls and the dolphins, but as well as himself. And he also alienates his own body parts when he's discussing. Quote, "It was considered a virtue not to talk unnecessarily at sea, and the old man had always considered it to be so and respected it. But now he said his thoughts out loud many times, since there was no one that they could annoy." End quote.
A virtue not to talk unnecessarily at sea. I wonder why that is. I wonder why the sailors and fishers of Cuba thought that way.
I don't know. I've heard the old saying that you're going to scare away the fish if you talk.
I thought they just told us that to keep us quiet.
It's probably what it was, but that's what I remember.
So do you think it's a virtue to not talk unnecessarily?
No, I don't think so. Because there's plenty of animals that talk unnecessarily, if you will. Some birds chirp and sing, sometimes for a purpose, other times just to make noise. And you know what? We too as humans sometimes just make noise. Is it virtuous to be silent?
I guess it depends on the game you're playing.
I think it's imperative to know when to be silent. But we're alive, therefore being alive to me insinuates a non-silent.
How so?
To be alive is to make noise. To be alive is to consume. The very being of life creates vibrations that we would attribute to noise eventually. Although some noises we simply can't hear because the frequency is either too high or too low. But it's noise nonetheless.
Surrounded by vibrations.
Yes.
So I think what this says about his personality is that he is trying to just entertain himself, and it's his way of not necessarily warding off boredom, but augmenting his boredom, adding to it and kind of using it to entertain himself. Because he's by himself, he's out at sea, so why not go ahead and externalize the narration that he's already doing? It's very stream of conscious. It's very kind of just narrating what he's doing, what he's seeing, again in a way as if everything around him is also animated and sentient and part of the conversation. I like reading that aspect of the story, and I liked seeing that.
If I were an old man and felt lonely, I too would speak out at all times to myself to reduce the loneliness.
And, I'm sure we can both think of people that have the habit of speaking to themselves. And older people that I know, seem to have that habit a little bit more. And maybe it's a loneliness thing, or maybe it's just something that happens with age. You just start externalizing my narration.
I don't know. That'll be an interesting thing to understand more. But nonetheless, I don't find it disvirtuous to talk out loud. I also don't find it necessary to talk out loud.
One minor thing that I kind of want to point out before we jump into the next thing, I thought it was very interesting that he doesn't catch a fish for 84 days, right? He's got this 84-day bad streak, and he finally catches something, and he gets an albacore. And it's a decent-sized albacore. And what does he do? He uses it for bait. And when we were talking about this in the in-person book club if he's fishing for a living, then it makes sense that even though, hey, that's a big fish, 10-pound albacore, there's not really much commercially you can do with that. You might as well go ahead and use it to try to get bigger fish, which that makes sense to me. I just thought it was very interesting. The first fish he actually catches in 84 days is used as bait rather than food or a way to make some money.
Right. I mean, eventually it becomes food, but I guess he was fishing for a larger catch, something that could actually be valuable.
Right. Okay. You going to take a little break or you want to keep going?
We got to keep going.
All right, let's keep going. Okay, so we see that Santiago at various times, like we talked about, calls fish and birds brother and attributes personality, intention, and emotion to them and the forces of nature around him. Quote, during the night, 2 porpoises came around the boat and he could hear them rolling and blowing. He could tell the difference between the blowing noise the male made and the sighing blow of the female. They are good, he said. They play and make jokes and love one another. They are brothers like the flying fish, end quote. And I think this is a really good example of that type of animism that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I think he's just attuned to the sea. This has been his entire life. This is his livelihood. Why would he not see a connection to it? I think it's a part of the complexity of the character himself, since he is so connected to nature and everything else around him.
It's just part of the way he is, like a bit, just because that's his life.
That's been his experience.
Rather than, someone who is in a modern big city is very much not conducive to having a animistic viewpoint of the world and environment around you.
Yeah, he knows each animal and creature. He understands their habits and behaviors. If you were to take someone that was born in a city and only lived in a city and took them out to sea or to the forest, they would not know the names of each bird that called out, and they would not know the sight of each fish and what they're called. They wouldn't have as strong of an emotional connection to this because they have not had those experiences, is my hypothesis.
Very fair. Very fair. Kind of thinking of that, what would a modern city-dwelling version of animism be or look like if we kind of saw the objects around us, the environment, the dwellings, as animated or extensions of human emotion and intention?
I think we need look no further than someone such as Frank Sinatra, who talks about going to New York or the liveliness of the city or the feeling of it or the air or the smell, and they attribute characteristics to neighborhoods of New York.
Right. Or like a whole city having a feeling. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We do have a little bit of, anthropomization there. Cities and places and vessels can take on characteristics.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a pretty human way to view things. We are this way, therefore we view ourselves and the things around us.
Okay, and so kind of playing along with that, the great fish itself. Let's talk a little bit about the great fish. During the agonizingly long duel with the huge fish, we see Santiago express both a deep love for the fish and an insistent determination to kill him. Quote, "Fish," he said, "I love you and respect you very much, but I will kill you dead before this day ends." End quote. It's very interesting that he has such a real and deep love for this fish, and he's determined to kill it. I love that aspect, the man versus beast aspect of this story, and it's with full respect.
Yeah, and there's no malice there. In fact, he explicitly has love.
Yeah, and at the surface, it seems kind of contradictory to want to kill, like you love something so much, but you also are hell-bent on killing it. But for him, there's no contradiction.
I don't think there's a contradiction for him, because to be alive is to kill. Regardless of what you eat, you will be consuming something. Something will die for you to maintain yourself.
Well, not everyone thinks of it that way. People don't necessarily see that. But you're saying that's what he sees.
I think that's what he sees, since he's so inundated in nature and understands the cycle of the birds and the dolphins and the fish. He talks about them and understands them, and the way that the character speaks of each of the animals, you can intuit that he has an understanding of their life cycle, and by proxy his own.
And again, this is combining that animism and with him being very much at one with this environment. But as he's having this back and forth with the fish, both in battle and in dialogue with the fish, he expresses, I think more than once, where he's like, one of us is going to die and it's going to be you, or one of us is going to die and it doesn't matter if it's me or you. He goes back and forth there, and he's multiple times fully okay with dying, and he would be okay with the fish winning, winning this duel.
Right. Yeah.
But he's kind of hell-bent on this happening, but he's at peace with it.
A small digression into one of the other books we read, I believe Happiness Hypothesis is the one where he talks about going and hunting in Alaska. And
Comfort Crisis?
Comfort Crisis. That's the one.
Yeah, Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter.
So Comfort Crisis, to truncate the story that he has there to bring it into Old Man in the Sea in this particular point, he's talking with these hunters that go and trail the caribou and try to kill some of the older males and have that for food. Those hunters that have done this again and again discuss how they don't want to use a super high-powered rifle that they can shoot it from far away because that's a video game, that's cheating, it's unfair. And we see, not only in that book, but other people that have a lifelong experience of hunting or fishing sometimes discuss the struggle that needs to be there, or a fighting chance is what I've heard it described.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. The animal needs to have a fighting chance. It needs to be a real contest, which is a very interesting perspective, because you would think if you're going to go hunt something for food, you'd want to be as efficient as possible. But when you are killing your own food and you're processing your own food, there's an intimacy there that is just as much a part of it as the processing and consuming, just the tasks to keep you alive. There's a almost spiritual, psychological level that's every bit as important to a hunter in this type of situation.
Right. So all that being said, I feel like he has that level of love and respect and understanding of, well, if I'm going to risk your life, it should only be fair that I risk my life as well.
Right. Okay, so after more than a full day of battling with the fish, Santiago is tired, but is still holding on literally and figuratively. In his exhaustion, he seems to merge with the fish and seems content to die. Here's an example that I want to get to that talks about exactly what we're talking about. Quote, "You are killing me, fish," the old man thought, "but you have a right to. Never have I seen a greater or more beautiful or calmer or more noble thing than you, brother. Come on and kill me. I do not care who kills who." End quote.
Well, I think we discussed what his mindset is there and talked about that connection and the struggle and that fighting chance.
So have you ever been in a situation like this where you've accepted the very strong possibility that you might die soon?
I think the times in which I felt like I was going to die, I didn't often have the leisure of time to process that death. My near mortality events typically were acute, and so I didn't think about dying. Just, oh, I'm going to die, let me try not to die. There was not a space or time for contentment to dwell in me.
I would agree with that. The experiences I've had where I'm like, oh, I could die any second now. Yeah, there's not a lot of time for reflection. There was one time where me and a coworker were driving from Jacksonville to Orlando, and the coworker was driving. It had just been raining off and on that day. We had just gotten onto I-4, and there was a big overpass we were coming up on, and wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden the truck we're in starts hydroplaning, and that truck just makes a beeline for the pillar of this overpass, this massive pillar, and we're just not slowing down, careening towards that thing. And me and my coworker are both like stiff arming the truck, and in my head, what flashes in my head because this is going on for a few seconds. What's flashing in my head during that experience is almost like anger because I had so much to do that day and so much to do that week. I was like, dang it, I'm not going to be able to get done, this, and this. So I don't know that, that's probably the most reflection I've had in what was happening. At the very last moment there, obviously I'm still alive now to tell the tale. But at the very last moment, like the truck just kind of veered off to the side of the pillar a little bit. And we finally got the truck to stop. It was fun. It was fun.
I'm glad you thought
it's
that
like
was
a cup
fun.
of coffee.
I'm sure you felt awake after.
Okay, so again, on this theme, I can also think of times where I've been really, really, really sick, like an extremely bad flu that had me in the hospital or almost in the hospital. Yeah, that was not fun. Could not get my fever down. I was like, wonder if this is going to do me in.
Yeah. No contentment, though. No calm, like, I'm fine if this virus beats me in this struggle.
No, not calm. I'd be happy with like the pain going away at that time, but not like a calm.
Huh.
Okay, any other thoughts there on his life and death relationship with the great fish?
No.
Well, now let's talk about the great DiMaggio. Throughout the novella, the old man and the boy talk about baseball in almost religious terms. They talk of the Yankees, the Tigers of Detroit, the great DiMaggio, and so on. Here's an example where Santiago says, "The Yankees cannot lose." And the boy responds, "But I fear the Indians of Cleveland." And Santiago responds, "Have faith in the Yankees, my son. Think of the great DiMaggio." And later on, the old man is thinking to himself while he's out at sea, quote, "My head is not that clear, but I think the great DiMaggio would be proud of me today. I had no bone spurs, but the hands and the back hurt truly," end quote. And so he's never met Joe DiMaggio, famous baseball player. He's listened to them on the radio, him and the boy talk about him, and they have this relationship, at least to me it seems like, with baseball that's almost at a religious level. In that last part there where he's talking about how he feels like the great DiMaggio would be proud of him, of how he performed that day, it's like him thinking of a saint, like having an internal little conversation with a saint. Did you get the same sense with their relationship with baseball?
When I was reading it, I didn't get the religious overtones that you are discussing here. I suppose I understood the character to truly love baseball, and I thought that was an artifact of them being set in Cuba at the time because of how strongly connected or how much baseball was incorporated in Cuban culture, because they loved playing it there. Even Fidel Castro loved playing baseball and would famously go play on the fields.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was a big cultural impact for Cuba. So when I first read the book, I didn't read it any further than just it being a characteristic of him being an old fisherman in Cuba.
Got it. So you didn't see the religious interpretation that I'm seeing?
Not when I first read it, nor do I see it now, but I understand that you and other analysts have looked at religious overtones inside of the work itself. That could be connected to part of the baseball explanation.
What it must be like to like baseball that much. That would be something I would love, like a helmet I would love to just put on for a little bit, just to like feel what it would feel like to love baseball that much.
Or any other sport, because there are people that treat certain sports to a religious fanaticism.
I remember hearing at some point that if you're watching a baseball game, you're watching your team play, that you can have a measurable temporary dip or elevation to your testosterone levels based on how your team performs. Have you heard that?
From you.
From me, yeah. Interesting, right?
Yeah, it is
Don't know if it's true.
Something about confirming your placement in the social hierarchy.
Yeah, that would be one theory as to why that happens. Oh, the warriors of my tribe lost. We need to be a little bit more sensitive to the dangers of the environment. Therefore, we don't need aggression and outgoing explorativeness as much as defensiveness. And then other way around, oh, the warriors of our tribe just won a great battle. Therefore, okay, we can take advantage of that, capitalize on that, and and exploit the environment.
Yeah.
Don't know if there's any truth to it, but that would be the underlying theory behind it.
What a nice thought to think about. Do you feel like this way, in your interpretation of the saint-like or religious-like characteristics of how Santiago and the boy view baseball, do you feel that that connects to Santiago's other mindset where he looks at nature and animals in a more anthropomorphized sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very much hand in hand because Santiago and the boy talk about baseball as the baseball. They call it the baseball, and they participate in a little bit of fictitious back and forth with this the same way they do with their daily routine with the casting net and the pot of yellow rice. It's just it's part of him in a way that's more than just, to my interpretation, more than just the way like someone in America today would be really into football, like someone who's always watching football on Sundays, who's really into it, wearing a jersey. That's not me, good for that person. But to me, what Santiago's doing is, again, to me, it seems more religious. Like baseball is a little bit more of his religion, or the baseball players are a little bit more like saints. And what they're doing there is not just like the same thing as the guy on the couch watching football on Sundays. So yeah, I see the two as very much intertwined. The baseball is a living, breathing thing for them in a intimate way.
Another part of the book I wanted to talk about is the sharks being relentless, and when they were eating his catch and constantly coming up and taking bites, which I can understand Santiago being absolutely infuriated about this because he struggled for a few days to catch this fish. He finally gets it hooked up and he's heading back to town. And then all of his great efforts just chomped away by a shark. Quote, "It was too good to last," he thought. "I wish it had been a dream now that I had never hooked the fish and was alone in bed on the newspaper." But man is not made for defeat, he said. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. In essence, he continues sailing on, and he steels himself to take on the inevitable blows that he knows is going to happen. He makes a makeshift weapon, basically like a makeshift harpoon, and he tries to remain hopeful, even knowing that the sharks are going to beat him to getting to the fish.
Let's talk about the way the novella ends. It ends with the sharp lines, quote, "Up the road, in his shack, the old man was sleeping again. He was still sleeping on his face, and the boy was sitting by him watching him. The old man was dreaming about the lions," end quote. I really like those ending lines to this novella. What do you think about them?
I think the ending lines provided a nice conclusion to the imagery of the entire book. The scenery set by Hemingway throughout the entire novella, I think, is encapsulated by this final dream.
I really like the image of Santiago just being dead exhausted, battling for multiple days, being hungry, and then he sleeps dreaming about the lions, while on the shore where he had parked his boat, there's the remains of the giant fish that the villagers are looking at and gawking at. Earlier in this scene, the boy says, "Hey, can I keep the blade of the fish?" And I just like that image, and I like the image of the boy just watching him, kind of keep an eye on him.
In-person book club, some people discussed how they saw it as a sad ending with he lost the fish, he's exhausted, and now he's going to go lay down. And I can see that reading of it, but I can also see and lean more towards a more positive reading of this old man Santiago was not defeated by the sharks. He was not defeated by himself, and he was not made to be defeated. And it was almost this happy ending, I guess, in my mind, that Santiago is having these dreams of the lions again, and that's him culminating his life together as he was here and he struggled. So even if he dies, he still won't be defeated. And I thought that was a beautiful, happier ending.
Yeah, I agree. The first time I read the book, I mentioned this earlier, it came off as more sad, more, like, this is kind of sad. But this time around, joy is what I got out of it. I got just the joy of living, the joy of life. That's so interesting. That was maybe 10 years ago that I read it for the first time. And now, I don't know. I really like that change. And of course, the story did not change. It's, the eyes looking at it that changed.
Right. I also feel like this ending for this book is a coalescence of a lot of different literary ideologies that have come together before that shows humanity struggling against nature, even though nature ultimately always wins in the end if we think about death. But it's the fact that we're here and the fact that we struggle is the point of humanity. And we can read that through several different novels or see it in movies. And I guess I enjoy that when I zoom out from this novella and think more about life and potentially the idea of death, and we can get to Ernest Becker's denial of death. But the point of our life, what does it really mean? And I think the struggle in it of itself is a part of the meaning of life.
You think that is something you're reading from it and getting from it? And how consciously do you think Hemingway was of that?
That's what I'm reading from it. Did Hemingway write that down? Perhaps. I think he definitely had plenty of time to reflect on life and the meaning of life, especially seeing death, being close to death, and having the life experiences that he had that we talked about. And so part of that struggle, I think, is what he saw in himself and those around him. So I believe that Hemingway was writing something akin to what I'm pulling out of it, but I could also just be diving deeper below the boat.
As is our wont. So speaking of which, I want to talk about the lions. In the last line there of the novella, I want to talk about, again, what they may represent. For me, it seems like they represent a connection with, the core of who he is, kind of along the lines of what you're talking about. Not necessarily his younger self, but like the image he has of himself in his life, which a lot of that would be his younger self, because there's more of his younger self in his memory than his old self. And he probably identifies with that a little bit more. But the lions to me seem like the image of himself as, happy and getting to fish and the thrill of hunting down fish and, putting himself against nature, like you're saying. What do you see in these lions?
I think the lions are still a bit ambiguous to me, but in a beautiful way ambiguous. Do they represent his younger self? Do they represent a time when he got to see them before? Do they represent masculinity and youthful fitness? I don't know.
I think part of it is that, for sure.
I think it could be all of that.
I would love to know what Hemingway himself thought of the lions, how much he thought of the lions. Again, this is something that, so much of his genius and subconscious were at work on this because of how quickly he wrote this story. So it's not like another book we've read, Master and Margarita, where, as we were reading about that book, it was a labor of love that he agonized over for 12 years and was even making revisions on his deathbed. This is not what this novella is. This novella was, something he banged out in a 6-week period down in Cuba, drinking, sailing, fishing, being Hemingway. And you can kind of see that the tightness of the prose and the shortness of the story itself brings a lot to bear in each of the words that are there. With The Master and Margarita, you can also see, while that's a much longer work, you can see that there is a lot of agonizing thought that went into each word. You can see how well the sentences are crafted and the thoughts are crafted in there, and that they've been worked and worked and worked. And to me, that's the impression I get out of it. Whereas this, the words are still very strong, stand out brightly, but it seems to me more of like a stroke of genius or just a lot of subconscious mastery at play here.
I would agree with that. In the same way that we can see Vincent van Gogh's artwork, where regardless of the amount of time that he spent on the piece that he's presenting, they stick with us. But in order for him to create that, he had to create so many prior. And in this case,
exactly,
that's what I'm seeing in Hemingway, is even though it only took 6 weeks to write this, it took him his lifetime of being a journalist and writing in order to get the skill to create it within 6 weeks.
Right. We're watching mastery at work here, where it seems effortless, but really, yeah, it's a culmination of many years that led to that point. I would agree.
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to talk about was, I'm not sure what episode this will end up being, but this is now concluding our conversation of The Old Man and the Sea. We spoke about atomic habits, and we started the series off with talking about denial of death. I don't really see any convergences between atomic habits and Old Man and the Sea, but I did want to talk about denial of death and, kind of any overlaps that we see here. Anything come to mind for you?
For denial of death?
Right.
We've, I believe, peppered and salted denial of death into this episode as some nice seasonings. But the lines, for example, I think are a relation to the idea of being alive as opposed to being dead. And we see the struggle for humanity. So there's not a direct correlation in my head in between denial of death or the meaning of the book of Denial of Death, which is a much more academic and psychoanalytical analysis of death and its meaning for the psyche. But if we take the theory proposed by Ernest Becker in that, we could apply it to why we enjoy the book or why we see the struggle against death and against nature as beautiful and poetic in the character of Santiago.
For me, that Santiago is the key there, because the difference between my first reading and the second reading, I think the joy I see now is because Santiago, while he may be aging, you can see in this probably last heroic act in his life that he is a part of something bigger than himself. This old man, yes, is going to pass and new generations will take his place. But to me, he's participating in something much larger, and it's his own kind of immortality. The hunt, being with the sea and the birds and the fish. There's kind of a timelessness there alongside the fact that this is a man towards the end of his life. His time is short, but at the same time, he is participating in that larger act that's happening, nature itself. That's reflected, I think, also in just how in tune he is with everything, calling the fish and the birds, brothers, and seeing them kind of in a cohesive way with himself, a part of it, not outside of it.
And with that, we see in the story, he has already accepted death, right? He talks multiple times, one of us is going to die, or if you're going to kill me, go ahead and kill me, when he speaks to the fish, or when he makes a makeshift harpoon and fights off the sharks. He has already accepted his death. He's totally fine with that. And so I agree with you in that he sees his own part in the circle of life here. He's okay with the death of himself as much as he's okay with the death of the fish.
Yeah, he says that. He says, I do not care who kills who, and that, to me, you can't get there without feeling completely at one with what's going on around you. And I think that goes back to, for me, the most powerful part of the novella that we talked about earlier is the little bit of philosophy that he kind of talks about there towards the end, where he says, man's not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed but not defeated. And that's exactly what's happening here. By many measures, he's being destroyed. His body's failing him. He doesn't have the same prowess he had before. The fish was technically, taken by the sharks, but he wasn't defeated. And that's why he's there dreaming about lions at the end.
In his victory.
Yeah.
And I think what are the, morals of the story we could bring from this, or at least I'm bringing from it, is even if you have failed, that doesn't mean that you were defeated. And I think about this in a more personalized idea. For example, if you set off to run a marathon and you train for it, and then the day of the marathon, you make it halfway, but then snap an ankle. You can fail at that goal that you had, but you can still succeed in your humanity of you tried and struggled and you continued. In the same way, he was hoping to get fish because he needs food and money, but he was still not defeated despite the lack of accomplishing that goal.
Reminds me of that poem, rage against the dying of the light. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a great place to end on. You have any other thoughts you wanted to go over?
Nope, those are all my thoughts, and I think we've thoroughly bashed this novella in our long episode here. And with that,
this is not a long episode. We can go much longer, and we will. We're going to have a 3, 4, 5 hour episode coming up somewhere.
I'm sure at some point we'll do that. That will break up into segments because of our upload requirements. However, with that, whether you've read this or not, thanks for tuning in and sharing with us. If you have read this or have any thoughts on what we shared here today, I would personally love to hear from you if you message us on Instagram at Deep Dive Book Club or send us an email at deepdivebook@gmail.com.
It's deepdivebookclub@gmail.com.
It's typed in here wrong. Let's get that in there. All right, I fixed it on the outline. deepdivebookclub.com.
Yes, you can reach us at deepdivebookclub.com. Send us your comments, give us your questions, tell us what we got right, tell us what we got wrong. Write us an essay about how you feel about it. We will read it on air. Well, with that, we will see you guys next episode.
See you next week.